So in the interest of getting folks out of here before 4, which is the goal of the day, just so everybody knows, we want to get started. We will start, members, we have the open issues lists from dated June 22nd. And the first one we're going to take up is resources. It appears that there is a conference compromise on page 15 of the resources agenda that LAO and finance and others and everybody has worked on a way to get us some fire protection without endangering our emergency fire services, and the LAO could briefly present that for us. Page 15, resources agenda, members.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Caroline Godkin with the Analyst's Office. There are a number of components to the conference compromise. The first is a shift of $76 million from the E-Fund appropriation into the base budget, reflecting a recommendation that we made earlier in the year where day-to-day expenses are more appropriately budgeted in CAL FIRE's base budget. Alongside that, this includes $1.7 million of expenditures for early hire of firefighters who are used for defensible space inspections. The second piece is budget bill language to clarify what are the authorised uses of the E-Fund. The third piece is to have the budget, anything that is moved into the base budget for next year zero-based for the following year because these items haven't fully been reviewed by the legislature, so to provide the legislature an opportunity to review all these items fully. The fourth piece is E-Fund reporting, enhanced E-Fund reporting so that there's clarity on actually what the E-Fund is being spent on. Trailer bill to enhance fire prevention reporting to provide the legislature with further information on actually what activities the department are taking and to ensure the legislature's intent for an increase in the number of fire prevention activities is met year on year. And then a trailer bill to enhance the oversight of Schedule A agreements, which is the agreements where CAL FIRE provides full service fire prevention activities on behalf of local entities.
And it's my understanding that on number 5, the effort as people draft the specific languages to align the reporting with the fiscal year rather than the budget, the calendar year, just to help make the reporting useful. Is that?
And to also add in some additional information that the department felt would be useful in clarifying what their activities, so actually broadening the scope of the report as well.
Okay, finance?
We support the conference compromise.
Okay. Does anybody have a different opinion or a question? Hearing none. Senator Leno moves the conference compromise as presented. Well done, everybody. To get us, what is that score in terms of, do we have to take a specific action or just on dollars, or it's understood from the, it's understood from the conference compromise document, right? Okay. On that basis, the conference compromise on page 15 of resources on a 5-0 vote on the Senate side. Are you not here, or you're okay?
You're okay, but we're missing Nielsen.
It's 3-0 on the Assembly side until somebody else shows up. So, Ms. Conway, I know is absent today. So, hopefully, Mr. Nielsen will be here soon, and he can add on or let us know if he has any issues. But I don't want to wait any longer. So, on a 5-0-3-0, that will be approved, and it's the item's open for add-on. Should Mr. Nielsen arrive. All right. So that's resources, right? You can hobble away. Okay. Mr. Ellers can hobble off the stage. That's why we had to do resources first. Then we'll go back to doing it in the order of the book members. It was an accommodation for Mr. Ellers' healing leg. We did resources first, so he can go off and talk with folks about other water resources related issues. In education agenda, members, open issues, page 26. there is a suggested, I don't know if it's a compromise exactly, but there is a suggested motion to do the Senate in a modified version that acknowledges that it will only be on children 0 to 5, and we suggest 0 PYs because we're not sure why we need to add PYs. It's a limited study, it's a short term, and it's built into some federal grant they're already doing. So we weren't clear about why we needed the PYs. LAO?
Yeah, I haven't, Rachel Ehlers, LAO, I haven't seen the language, but you're right, this is, I think, intended to be a federal grant that we are currently working on the application to submit, so presumably your action would just be indicating to the administration that's putting the application together that there's legislative interest in including this feasibility study in that application.
It's our understanding that the department's already planning to do something like that. This would just clarify that we're with it. Finance?
Thank you, Sarah Swan, Department of Finance. So I believe that the action was an augmentation of $1 million that was to come from the grant.
It's a carve out of the federal funds that they're going to get from this application, I think, the way I understood it. It's not an augmentation. It's you're getting these federal funds, and of those federal funds, you shall use some money for this study. That's the way I understood it.
So the action would be just budget bill language. We had it scored as a $1 million augmentation from the federal fund source. So if the Senate, so this is,
I think there's
quite a bit different than
we should clarify that, but I think
Senate
there's
action.
a grant that they're already applying for, and what we would be saying is, of that grant, you shall use $1 million of it for this purpose within the context of that grant. Right?
That was my understanding.
Did we not have language?
Well, Madam Chair, what else can this money be used for besides the study? I mean,
Well, it's a larger. Go ahead, Ms. Ehlers, explain the grant that they're getting.
Yeah, this is a $10.7 million grant that the feds have one-time money that the feds have offered for states to submit applications for a number of quality improvement activities for early education. So the state's currently working on putting an application together for these funds. There's an advisory group that's hearing ideas about what we should include in that application. So I think this action would signify legislative interest in having this activity be one of the activities. I think it's something that they're talking about doing. It's one-time money, so a study is an appropriate use of one-time money. But one of the things we were recommending is that perhaps there be a larger hearing, a larger discussion of all of the options available for this kind of money. And I think there is actually a hearing being scheduled for next week on that topic, where the Department of Ed is going to present all the options they're talking about for this funding.
well, I'd be apprehensive to support this one without knowing all of my other options, because
I think maybe Mr. Podesso has suggested something out here, which is budget bill language that suggests that within that grant application they ought to include doing this study. I mean, the data that they're seeking here, and it is one-time money for one-time purposes, so getting the data that will help make future decisions and spend money appropriately is the point, I think, of the language the subcommittee did. Mr. Huff, you may have been there. I don't know that we actually need to put a specific dollar amount on it. That may be.
This is a larger grant with other activities and ideas included in it. So it is appropriate to have a larger discussion about what the various activities are and what the funds might be used for. There is an advisory committee that's been having public hearings talking about it. I think there are plans to have a hearing next week of a subcommittee of the Senate Education Committee to talk about it as well. I believe they were going to invite assembly members too. So it's clear there's legislative interest in including this activity. Our recommendation when this came through on the first pass was maybe holding off on that larger policy discussion.
I think the subcommittee's interest was in, since the bigger fund, the grant application requires that you do some data collection. It is one-time money. That is the purpose of this grant. That should that money be received, that we ensure that we are using some of it to do this early learning quality improvement study that has been recommended by the state's policy advisory body, and that they want to collect the data so that we do it right the next time.
Madam Chair, thank you. Just to clarify, so the grant can pay for one-time activities. It's available for a 3-year period. One of the options that's being considered by the Advisory Council, which has just been constituted recently and just started having these conversations, is to consider piloting the quality rating system, which is currently, or the recommendations for which are currently under development. So data collection is an option among many options. But again, we would maintain that this is premature. In light of the conversations that are happening with the ELAC, we really feel it's within their jurisdiction.
Mr. Ho? I don't know if Mr. Huff remembers. It just seems to me that the subcommittee felt strongly about making sure that this study was was something people have wanted for a long time. This grant provides an opportunity to do it, and it would provide data in the future. And the point was to make sure that that happens.
This was something really important to the chair of the subcommittee, and that's why you're seeing it here.
Right. Which is,
I didn't share that, incidentally, but the majority did, so I just figured I would represent that for you.
okay. I mean, I had that sense, and it just seemed like something that got talked about, and it was an important piece of it. I don't know, Ms. Skinner, are you?
I think we're fine with going with the subcommittee's recommendation. The only thing we wanted to ensure was that the study cover 0 to 5. And I think it might have been silent on the age, so.
And the original one.
Right.
All right, why don't we suggest that you draft budget bill language on this, and I don't know if you really need to set aside a dollar amount exactly, or whether we just need to do the budget bill language in such a way that indicates when this grant is there. One of the things that folks expect is that this will be included in it, and the study being 0 to 5.
And again, if you do hold it open, I believe this hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday. Where
I don't want to hold it open. I'm trying to close it.
Okay.
Okay. I'm trying not to hold it open.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Hearing can go forward. The budget is expressing interest that a portion of this, the appropriate portion of this, be used for doing this study on 0 to 5 data collection, whatever the study that the subcommittee wanted. So that's the motion. You and Mr. Podesto are in charge of drafting the budget bill language. Okay. So that's the motion. 3-2 on the Senate side. You okay? 3-2 on the Assembly side. Is that Mr. Nielsen's a no? 3-1.
3-1.
3-1. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So it's budget bill language, and it's 0 to 5, and it's 3-2 on the Senate side, 3-1 on the Assembly side. All right. Did you understand that? I just want to get rid of it, whatever it is. I don't want to go back to these things again. Okay. 3-2, 3-1. Okay. On, no, we're not ready to do that one. Is there any other? Let me see here. Page 47, the Student Loan Operating Fund. It appears, members, that Finance and LAO went forth per the last conference discussion on this and actually came up with what appears to be a very workable conference compromise. LAO?
Judy Hyman, Legislative Analyst's Office. The compromise provides for a $100 million general fund offset from the Student Loan Operating Fund, of which $75 million would be paid throughout the year on a schedule determined by the Student Aid Commission in consultation with Finance. The remaining $25 million would be contingent on an executive order from the Director of Finance. So this enables you to score the full $100 million general fund offset and gives Finance some comfort that they can manage the cash flow to ensure that there will be no problems with meeting the obligations of the aid programs or the proposed sale of Ed Fund.
Okay, no, we appreciate it. This was the discussion we had about how to draft the language so that the $100 million can be used, but allowing Finance to make sure that we're not prejudicing the fund should there be a delay in the sale of the Ed Fund, right?
Madam Chair, Lynn Podesta, yeah, we're comfortable with the language. This captures what we had talked about, giving us some discretion here on
the last
we all
piece
want
of
to
it.
maximize it, but we want to be sure that we don't overdo it.
Okay. That said, is there any objection to the conference compromise? Hearing none. On a 5-0-4-0 vote, that will be approved. Okay. Next agenda would be, let me see, comes next. General government. Oh, this is going to be the longest one. Okay. General government. We have my agenda first. Who's that? Like a movie. That's a movie. Okay. Okay, I gotta do this way. Okay. Page 11, members. The Workforce Investment Act dollars. LAO had given us a comprehensive list at the y'all still. If you go to page 11 in your binders, you probably find a little blue piece of paper that that laid out the existing issue, and my understanding that the proposed compromise is Assembly dollars, basically, which is the governor's distribution, more or less, except that Finance promises in blood that $7 million is carried over is available from the current year in parolee services that were not spent, and they will be spent for that same purpose, added to the $6 million that's listed for 10-11 in the budget year. Is that?
Madam Chair, Jessica McGuinn, Department of Finance. That's our understanding. We've confirmed it both through the Employment Development Department and through Corrections that they have $7 million they can carry over for a $13 million program in 10-11.
In 10-11, and because they got started late spending what they were supposed to spend last year, so basically this would be a full year's spending, which last year was only half year, so it would be at the same level we thought we were going to get last year, more or less, right?
Pretty close, yes.
Okay. So,
can we argue that if they don't spend it next year, they don't get it rolled over, though?
Well, there's that.
I'm being facetious.
Yeah. And hopefully they will manage to do what they were supposed to do with the money. I'm with you, except that I want those services real bad. So with that understanding, Mr. Blumenfield moves the Assembly version with the understanding that it will include a total of $13 million spent in parole services this year. Is there any objection? 5-0 on the Senate side, 4-0 on the Assembly side. That will be approved. Okay. Page 19 through 21 requires a lengthy LAO explanation of what this all means.
Jason Cisney, LAO. This is our effort to help you close pages 19 through 21, the employee comp and retirement agenda items. Typically, and this follows in this practice, what we do in conference at about this point each year is update the estimates for employee compensation and retirement cost based what's on current law and current labor agreements. So that's what's here. Now, it's a little bit unusual this year in that we know the administration is poised in the coming weeks days to submit to the legislature proposed new labor agreements. Those labor agreements typically, I would assume, would require a 2/3 vote in bills to be ratified here in the legislature. And in the bills that ratify those new labor agreements, or if the legislature rejects them, that's obviously an option as well. But in those bills, there can be appropriation changes to the Budget Act that either increase or decrease appropriations. So what we're suggesting to you here is to update the budget bill based on the current law, current labor agreement numbers that we have. Finance and our office agree on those numbers. And then if you choose to ratify the proposed labor contracts, you can make those budget adjustments, savings or otherwise, in those bills. That's most of what's here and the changes that we recommend, pages 19 through 21. These
well,
costs,
isn't there a control section in here
that's right,
sort of allows you to do those adjustments as...
That's right. The mechanism in the Budget Act that scores these is a control section. All of these changes add $225 million to the budget problem that was reflected in the May revision and in both houses' budget packages. The bulk of that $225 million relates to a new federal program, a temporary federal program, the early retiree reinsurance program. There was an initial estimate of $200 million of savings at the May revision. We know now the actual savings in 10-11 will be much less. And so somewhere over half of that $225 million difference relates to that one scoring item, a more updated scoring of the benefit of this federal program. The higher pension costs, the pension rates that were adopted by CalPERS recently add $87 million to the 10-11 budget problem. Both the governor's budget and May revision and both of your houses' packages already included hundreds of millions of dollars of increased pension cost. The rates that CalPERS adopted were somewhat higher than had been expected, and so that adds $87 million. And in addition, the recent health premium rates that CalPERS adopted adds tens of millions of more to the problem, and so those are the components of the $225 million. Also in this package are two not-in-conference items that really allow for technical adjustments to the budget to reflect budgeted savings and that both houses and the May revision all had. One of them relates to the early retiree reinsurance program that I mentioned before, and the other relates to the ongoing matters related to the one-day payroll delay that was enacted last year. That's an ongoing action, and so in order to account for the one-day delay in payroll, there will need to be this type of language in every Budget Act from here on forward until the payroll delay is removed. So those are the thoughts.
If in fact the contracts that were, what we know about them publicly at least, that were announced last week, should they be approved by all parties and then by the legislature, would reduce this by about $47 million. Is that? Where did I get that number? I had it someplace.
Corinne Martone, Department of Finance. The contract savings proposal is $72 million other funds and $43 million general fund.
Yeah, that's the $43 million general fund of just those four. And should other units do similar things, then the savings could be as much as, could offset completely this 225 and
Correct.
And then some, right? Senator Dutton?
Yeah, just some additional information. So when I total these three items up, the compensation and retirement health benefits, that's about $13 billion in round numbers. Does that sound about right? Or general fund?
It's in that zone, yes.
Yeah. Do you have any idea? I'm kind of curious how that compares to 10 years ago. Where we've grown during the last 10 years. And if you don't have it right now, maybe you can get it to me.
It's in the chart, right, on the PERS. 10 years ago, we were paying zero is the problem, so it's kind of a rough year to use.
We're paying zero?
There were 3 years during the late 90s where we paid zero into the PERS contributions.
I think finance does have some data that...
Because this, what I'm talking about is what we're talking about is compensation, health, and retirement, so...
So what's your question specifically?
Well, I'm just curious what the growth has been over the last, into the general fund, what the growth has been over the last 10 years.
Growth in payout, though, or growth in general fund payments to this?
Well, the growth of the, the charge to the, how much is it changing? Today is $13 billion. What was it 10 years ago? That's what I'm trying to get to.
$13 billion.
I don't have a percentage growth if you combine everything.
No, not percentage. Just give me dollars would be fine. I can work out the rest of it.
I don't think we have salaries broken out by fund in front of us, so we'll have to get back to you.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to do is I want to make sure I'm looking at apples and apples.
Okay.
I don't want to,
Yeah, what we have in front of us has salaries for all funds, so we'd have to go back and break it out.
Okay, if you could, I'd appreciate it.
On page 8 of your handout, we took, this is a chart we update regularly. It looks at just general fund retirement costs. It doesn't include payroll. And so, obviously,
so this is
those
the cost
costs
of
increase
what we pay out to people who have retired, not the amount.
These are the state's contributions to retirement systems.
So this is, okay, state contributions.
The general fund contributions each year.
Yeah, our liability.
And as you were pointing out, we were in the unusual situation late in the 90s where for several years we were not contributing very much to CalPERS in particular. And so that figure at the early part of the figure in 98, 99 is relatively low. That's one of the reasons. And for a variety of reasons, increases in unfunded liabilities, investment returns, and increases in benefits, the costs have increased substantially since then.
Yeah, but the only point I was trying to make, Senator Dutton, is this is kind of an unfair year to compare if you do 10 years ago, because there was this anomaly period where many people now think we made a mistake of not contributing, even though we had the money at the time. Because the fund was doing so well in the market, we basically made decisions not to contribute or to contribute very little and allowed just the interest to pay the deal.
Oh, I understand that.
So that's all.
I was on City Council
deal.
back when CalPERS was giving me their estimates of almost an 8% annual return, and it was never going to stop, and I questioned it back then, and obviously
that was the one. Yeah,
obviously, but I was always being told that, well, hey, look, it's our money, and therefore, you shouldn't be concerned about it because we're self-funding, and obviously we should have been concerned about it at the local level.
That's fair.
I'm assuming the state, but that still doesn't. Then forget about the retirement benefit, just the compensation and the health benefit. Then how much has that grown?
This chart has both
in dollars. Okay.
So it's kind of on this chart, but I think that's the closest you can get right now. But I don't know
the
if that's just
retirement
general
part
fund.
is the payroll part is a little trickier, particularly breaking out with general fund. It's possible to estimate it. Just we don't have it with us.
I'm just trying to get an idea what kind of growth in dollars that we've seen. I can do the calculation with regards to time value of money and stuff.
Right. Well, I can tell you just that in the last 10 years, total salary has gone up a little bit less than 50%, but that also includes PY growth. And so
that's salary.
That's total salary dollars, all funds.
Well, I'm not looking for average payroll. I just want to know what my total cost has been for operations and so forth.
In terms of estimating it, we would only be able to estimate the share that was general fund a decade ago, and so roughly the same percentage general fund would be assumed. Now, that's probably not accurate.
Would we go from $3 billion to $13 billion? Would that sound like where we're at, or is it $1 billion to $13 billion? I mean, how?
I don't know what.
I'm trying to get an idea of. I mean, how much? Right. How many dollars? And
all
that
funds.
I got to look at $26 billion 10 years from now, or is it?
Right. Total funds went from $16.3 billion to $23.5 billion. But like I said,
during that 10 year.
During that 10 years, which though isn't just cost increase, it's also PY growth.
Okay. I want to know that too. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? This is a little confusing. It's my understanding, if I read this correctly, page 19, then, the proposed compromise is to have the administration score $20 million in current year savings, and then for 10-11, it's plus 156.432. In the overall item. I don't know that that's just general fund. I think that's total, right? Total fund.
That's general fund.
That's general fund?
Yes.
Okay. In the item 9650-001-00001. And there will be conforming changes in the associated schedules. Then there's an augmentation for employee compensation, which is the items on page 20. And off of the assembly version, it's assembly plus 1.847. On one item, assembly plus 6.074 on the second item, and assembly plus 2.993 on the third item. Million. And then there's budget bill language on the early retirement reinsurance savings and pass the savings through to their budget. And there's another, on page 21, there's a control section, which, based on the little chart that's been handed out, I think needs to be modified or tweaked a bit by PERS from some input people got from PERS.
So the recommendation we have on page 21 is the assembly, plus the updating the pension contribution rates in the control section, which is our standard practice at this point in the year. There's also to prepare for the possibility of these new MOUs that change pension rates. What we recommend and what we're comfortable with is actually budget bill language. We have a version here. CalPERS is suggesting modification. We're okay with that, with some minor technical adjustments to adjust the rates for new MOUs.
Okay, so the language on, let's see, if we use the LAO handout, it's the language on page 9 or 10? 10. The language on, no, page 9? 6. The language on page 6 of the handout is the language that would be adopted as modified by the technical adjustments and the PERS input. And then on the other is the payroll deferral budget bill language control sections. So
Madam
does
Chair,
everybody
can I
else
just-
have this kind of chart? I mean, it's this one. So.
May I say something
Yes.
quick? I'm going to support this because we pretty much don't have an option. But I hope that, I believe this illustrates why we should be considering pension reform as a part of the whole budget package. I'll just stipulate that and be quiet then.
No, and I think that's, too, why we made the point. If the MOUs, as proposed, go forward, you actually, these numbers will go down. The current, even just the ones we've already, that have been tentatively approved, that are coming to us in August, would save $43 million in general fund off of what we're just about to do. So that's why they needed all the control section to move it around. If other bargaining units go down a similar path to the ones that have closed, then we would actually probably get back most of what's being augmented here. Would probably come back to us. So there's a lot of room here. But point taken. All right. With that said, does anybody else have any questions, comments, or concerns with this? So, okay, the package on pages 19, 20, 21, and the two NIC languages as proposed by the LAO on a 5-0 vote on the Senate side, 4-0 vote on the Assembly side will be adopted. Very good. That was good work, everybody, trying to figure that all out and haggling with the PERS people. Is good work. Okay. Health, I don't think there's anything ready. That one's gotten real complicated by the federal government sending letters causing issues with some of what we thought were going to work. So everybody's, I think, am I right? Finance, everybody's trying to figure out the 1115 and the problem with the Medi-Cal, the hospital fee that the federal government has raised.
That's correct, and yeah.
Yeah, we can't close those until we figure that out. So I think that's what everybody's working on. Public safety, I don't think there's anything new we can close there. There's only two issues open, but one of them works out, is part of the discussion we'll be having in a minute on possible sort of the corrections question of how you realign services and who does what. The county level, the state level. Yes or no? On the Human Services agenda, members, page 6. That's all right. Just sit here. It's fine. You ready to do this?
Yeah.
Yeah, the webinar. Okay. On the Human Services agenda, members, page 6, the foster care training. This was the issue the federal government has told us we need to do something And the governor had one level, the Assembly had one level, Senate had a different level, and there's now a proposed compromise. That's the lowest level some of us think we could get away with and still keep the federal government happy. But Mr. Bland.
Madam Chair, Todd Bland for the Analyst Office. I think you covered it. I can restate it a little bit.
Yes.
Essentially, the issue is essentially this is funding for a approved performance improvement plan having to do with sort of more of a financial audit. Are we claiming correctly? The administration originally proposed over $1 million for this. The Assembly approved $350,000. The Senate nothing. I'm sorry. Assembly did nothing. Senate approved $350,000. The issue went to conference. The administration looked and came back with a revised proposal at $304,000, which is shown on your sheet. The staff recommendation on the sheet is to do essentially one portion of the administration's scaled-back proposal. That's just the web-based training.
Okay.
That's what's before you.
Does anybody have finance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Wardlaw, Department of Finance. We can certainly work within the scope of the web training. However, we do feel strongly that the in-person training component is important, and if we don't have it, there may be a downstream impact as far as our ability to pass the federal review.
But it costs a bunch of money. Mr. Dutton?
I guess I'm just, because I'm going to have to ask my accountability question again, because I'm getting really tired of throwing money at things and then seeing something not actually improve. I understand this is because we're currently still under, we're not under federal compliance and stuff. They've got, $8.5, $9 million sitting in there now. That's still a lot of money. I don't understand what in the heck what are you going to do for $300 million? Or is that what?
No, the proposal is $113,000.
No, okay, $300,000. But what you got $8.5 million?
This is separate from the perform. In other words, there are a little confusion. There are two performance improvement plans. One has to do with the whole performance of our foster care and child welfare system, and there we have made investments in the millions of dollars to comply with that program. This is really on a much narrower issue of just sort of financial compliance and an audit report and an issue we had, and essentially 4E funding, the Title 4E funding is $1 billion. So we've committed to the federal government that we will try to be more accurate and do more. So essentially the issue is how much do you want to invest in meeting that? But it really is separate from our broader issues in child welfare performance. That's
but they can't do this within existing, because they do have existing dollars, and they've got millions now, so they can't
not
do it
on
within
these
existing?
Not designated for these particular financial issues. I mean,
we can't reallocate existing dollars?
Well, I mean,
I think that's what this is. This is existing federal dollars, isn't it?
This is a combination of federal and general.
Oh, there's a little general fund.
There's a little bit of general
it's a match.
fund in this.
I don't mind moving around or spending the federal dollars. I mean, I hate to be nitpicky over just, this amount of money. It's still a lot of money anyway, but I guess I just don't like the idea of taking more general fund money for this. I mean, you got to be able to fund it out of the other.
I think the concern was that if we don't do this, they could endanger the $1 billion in foster care money. If we don't do something, the federal government could ding us for the entire $1 billion, and that's what people were trying to defend against. Finance had proposed $1 million for $500,000 general fund. We've gotten it down to $113, and which about 75 would be general fund or
less. But isn't there other monies there that they could just reallocate that don't have the risk at it or risk factor? I mean, in order to get the job done.
The scaled-down approach is $101,000 general fund. The portion associated with the training would be $78,000 general fund for the social worker training and $23,000 general fund for the probation officers. That combines to the $101,000 relative to the in-person training.
That's the governor's proposal. That is not the proposal before us. Though the recommendation is, Mr. Bland, repeat where we are.
I think the staff recommendation is to just do one piece of the governor's revised scaled-back proposal, to just do the web-based training, which is a total cost of $113,000, about half of which I believe is general fund, unless my finance colleagues have a number on that.
That's
the recommendation of that's the staff recommendation. We think either the administration's scaled back approach could work or potentially this. It's just a question of, we're obviously trying to conserve general fund resources and not put any more in than we have to. On the other hand, it's $1 billion in funding, and we have promised to try to increase our accuracy. I think at a minimum, you should do the staff recommendation. We'd be comfortable even with the administration's proposal.
Senator Leno?
On the subject of the program improvement plans that the LAO has just referenced, I wanted to point out that the budget subcommittees of each of our houses has committed about $22 million in total funds for a federal program improvement plan regarding things like child welfare services and foster care. And that also is in response to federal concerns about how we are searching for children's relatives and how stable their living situations is while they're in foster care. And so when you add the $22 million to the $133 million we restored relative to the governor's veto, we're investing appropriately in foster care. And I just want to put that in the context of this modest $113,000, which I think is a good compromise relative to the $1 million that the Finance had put forward. And I had one question for Finance. You think that this is going to be too narrow of an approach? We're still going to be potentially at risk with the federal government. Wasn't the determination that we weren't up to par a rather anomalous situation itself?
The determination, the feds take a relatively small sample size when they come out and do their audit. In that particular audit, they selected 80 cases. Of those, 6 failed to pass. Had we been 4 or less, we would have passed. So we were close. However, when they come back out again for the next review, we've made a commitment to them that we would do a comprehensive training. And our concern is they'll come back if we don't meet this fairly narrow criteria. We could be penalized significantly.
So I'm fine with the chair's recommendation here, but if to bring Mr. Dutton along, might we do the 113 or is that 113 for the web training, and then to buffer us a little bit more with the personal training, they could find that in existing resources?
You can direct them to do that. What they'd be able to come up with, I don't know.
The department maintains that they don't have the resources to redirect on this particular item.
Yeah.
I think they can, but the web-based training, the thought here was, I think that the web-based training will provide a broader audience. I mean, the administration's direct proposal was only 100 social workers and 175 probation officers. The web-based training and the technical assistance could potentially reach all counties and provide better service to more people. So.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Dutton? Anybody? The issue is 113 total funds. Approximately half would be general fund, web-based training only. All right. Mr. Dutton, still a no. All right.
The reason why I'm having a hard, we're the ones that's supposed to redirect money, not the department. And now that you reinstated millions of dollars, I mean, can't squeeze $100,000 out of all the millions of dollars. I mean, that's just unbelievable. But that's the reason why.
Okay.
I'm not convinced.
All right. On a, Mr. Huff? On a 3-2 vote on the Senate side, 4-0 on the Assembly side, that will be approved. The compromise, 113, web-based training only. All right. Local government, you don't. So I don't see anything there. Public safety, we already talked about. This is, public safety? I'm not ready to go. Not ready. Good try. We're everybody's still contemplating the Brown Act discussion from last week, Ms. O'Malley being back again. I think there's folks who are still trying to figure out how to make all that work. I think, members, unless somebody else has an item you want to, you've been contemplating and you have questions, or you want to bring one up for discussion that's from any of those open items agendas, the thought for the next little period of time would be just to catch up after the meeting we had last week, the LAO's presentation on the state-local fiscal relationship and some of those issues. And some of you have seen that, all of us have been trying to think about that. We had asked the LAO at that hearing to start to think about what are the options that make some sense. They have done some prior work in this area for possibly aligning our revenues and responsibilities of local and state governments better. Most of you are aware, and we're happy to hand out, if somebody doesn't have it, the Senate budget staff has come forward with some suggestions for possible proposals in areas in which we might do. That's a handout we'll give to folks. And we had asked the LAO to both give us feedback on the proposal that we had kind of thrown out there, as well as any other additional options, thoughts for work groups this weekend as people continue to pursue these discussions on how to deal with some of these bigger issues, and whether there are opportunities in some form of realignment, that we kind of have all those options on the table and have them discussed a bit as staff and LAO and finance continue to try to develop some options that work over the weekend. So that said, the LAO is prepared to chat about the piece that's in front of us.
Good afternoon. Marianne O'Malley from the Legislative Analyst Office. Last week, you gave us an interesting challenge. You asked us to come back and identify realignment failures. And we went back in the office and talked about it a little bit. And I don't know if we're going to come back today and give you realignment failures, but there are elements that we'd call shortcomings, and maybe we can bring those to your attention. And I'm going to be talking today about the 1991 realignment plan, along with our preliminary assessment of the 97, and we're still doing our work on the 97 plan. And it might be just helpful to talk a little bit about the differences between those two plans. In 1991, you may remember, the state shifted programs from the state to the county level, and also modified state-county shares of cost in a way that increased county obligations. And the state wanted to make realignment serve as a budget solution. And so it increased two taxes, a sales tax and modified the vehicle license fee, and provided that funds to the counties along with those increased program responsibilities. The 97 trial court restructuring and realignment is quite different. In that case, the state took a share of county cost and shifted it up to the state. In that case, there was no tax that was increased. It was using existing state resources to carry out the cost of the trial court program. So it served in that case as county fiscal relief and created increased cost on the state. So there are two different types of realignments that we're going to be talking about. Our preliminary sense, and again, we're still reviewing the 1997 realignment, but our preliminary sense is that program realignment didn't give the state sufficient ability to control cost. And one of our ongoing guidelines and recommendations to you is if you shift a program cost, you want to give the entity that has those program costs real ability to control those program costs. In terms of the 1991 realignment, as we said last week, our sense of it is the program was overall a success, particularly in the area of mental health. It's benefited by having stable funding stream and also greater program control. What were the 1991's planned shortcomings? First, we always recommend that you pay close attention to the fiscal incentives. And in the 91 realignment plan, we got it partly right. On the mental health side, we gave counties funding. for mental health. And then we also told counties that they were responsible if they put one of their residents in a state hospital. They were responsible for paying the cost of the state hospital. And what we found is counties invested a lot more in outpatient treatment and also created a lot more community beds. And they started utilizing this expensive state resource to a much less extent. And so overall, there were greater efficiencies. And that was a case where we did it right. In the case of IHSS, though, I don't think we got the fiscal incentives correctly. In that case, the state increased the county's share of cost. And we were thinking that it would give counties increased incentives to control that program's cost. The financing mechanism, though, under realignment doesn't really work that way. And to give you a very simplified example, let's just suppose for a moment we only had two counties, County A and County B. And County A makes major efforts to control that program's cost and basically keeps them pretty constant, okay? County B doesn't, and County B's costs go up quite a bit. Well, under the realignment plan of 1991, first call on the growth in the sales tax goes to offset statewide increased cost for IHSS program. So the first call on that increase in sales tax goes to County B to fully offset County B's increased cost. Then only after County B is reimbursed is the remainder divided amongst County A and County B. So County A, that took these major steps to control the program's cost, doesn't bear a fiscal benefit associated with those activities. And so there's a case where we changed the county's fiscal share of costs, but we really didn't change the fiscal incentives in any significant way. So the fiscal details matter with realignment. What else did we learn in terms of 91 realignment? A reserve is a really good idea. In terms of realignment, a very large portion of the funds was a half-cent sales tax. And in most years since 1991, the sales tax has grown, oftentimes by about 5% a year. But over the course of that, in about 4 years, we've actually had declines in the sales tax. And that, from a program standpoint, is hard for them to manage on a year-to-year basis. Had we created the 1991 realignment with some kind of a rainy day reserve, it might have made program implementation a little bit easier. And then the last shortcoming, or something that we have learned, is that it's really important when you're designing the program realignment to think about measuring outcomes in the future. At the time of the 1991 realignment, there was efforts taken, there was discussion about measuring county activities, particularly in the area of public health and in mental health. But for many reasons, that largely never happened. And so today, it's very difficult to give you firm data about the differences in the number of people served from before and today. It's very difficult to be able to measure exactly what actually happened with this program realignment. And I'd say that that was a shortcoming of the 1991 plan. You also asked us to think a little bit about what would be a reasonable candidate for realignment, and we prepared this list with itty-bitty font. And you should know that we asked our staff to take a pretty expansive look at their programs. And to take a look and to think about which programs could benefit from greater control at the county levels. And I should point out that these programs that are listed here are at the conceptual stage. They are not ready to assemble. Okay, they are conceptual ideas. And I should also point out that if you see a program on this list that you're not comfortable with that not having statewide uniformity, if you don't think that service variation is appropriate in these areas, then you probably want to remove that program from the list. That is not a suitable candidate for realignment. These are programs that we think, in our judgment, there is some merit to allowing some innovation, some program variation at the county-by-county level. And so that's why we identified these programs. You can see that the first group, the crim justice, and also at the very last in the health on the first page, it has been a sort of an ongoing LAO recommendations. We think in terms of lower-level offenders, particularly those with substance abuse problems and juvenile offenders, that it makes more sense for them to be supervised at the county level and have greater resources, greater programs for them at the county level. And so you'll see that's been an ongoing theme of LAO realignment recommendations, and you'll see it here on the first page. You'll also see that after some significant thought, we included child care on our list. And In terms of child care, you should know that it's really a whole wide array of services and a wide array of programs that are directed and operated by state and local entities. The system right now is not operated in a uniform state manner. Our look at it is we think that child care might be a good candidate for realignment because there's some potential for local innovation, improvement, and greater efficiency. There are myriad ways of dividing the child care program between stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. But again, we caution that if you're reluctant to have differentiation in child care service delivery at the local level, then realigning child care would not be something that you'd want to consider. On the next page, we have identified a series of programs where we think that some changes in cost sharing might be appropriate. Notice that there's some fairly detailed caveats there along the side, but these are programs where we think some change in state-county cost shares might be appropriate and might provide appropriate increased fiscal incentives to get good program outcomes. You also asked that we take a look at the Senate Democrat plan regarding the restructuring proposal and to offer some initial comments. Our sense, first off, is that the programs on this list there's good sense to consider them for realignment. And that would be true whether or not you want to consider realignment as part of a budget solution or simply realignment to get better program outcomes. We think a lot of these programs here, you could get better program outcomes by administering them at the county level. We'd also caution you that the success of this realignment plan or any realignment plan really depends upon the details in terms of implementation, accountability, and planning for a successful transition. And then the very last thing I'd leave you with is in terms of this realignment, we were talking earlier about the 1991 realignment plan and the 97. You should know that those realignment changes made in the 1991 and 97 are largely the same today. So whatever realignment that you make or that you consider may well last for another decade or 2 or 3. So you should take the long view as to what your successors may want to see in terms of state-local relations, because program realignment, once implemented, is very difficult to change, very difficult to modify. So you want to be able to make sure that however you've aligned your program's responsibilities between state and counties, that you're doing it thoughtfully and you're doing it for the long term. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
To do any of these is probably generate more savings in the out year, and they really are structural changes to kind of address the problem of this responsibilities and revenues issue and innovation and who can do the service best and how do people best access and know who's doing what, kind of lines of accountability issue. But you get savings potentially over long term, at least from a state savings perspective, over a longer term on some because of the efficiencies. And sort of the juvenile justice parole realignment that we've already started fits into those categories, I think. So.
There are some cases where shifting a program from a state level to a county level over time, you think you can get better outcomes and perhaps better outcomes at lower cost. There's potential for that. There's other cases where restructuring is really a modification of a cost share.
Yeah.
State having 25% and we're changing it to 20% or vice versa. Those kinds of changes usually can be implemented more quickly, and they could have result in state savings, although in that case at increased county cost.
But if the question then is let's say the county's getting a greater share, are they getting greater ability to create cost savings to make their share not cost them more total dollars? I mean, that's kind of the question.
It's very important to make sure that the county share of cost is largely commensurate with their ability to control the program.
Right, that's the issue. I mean, it's kind of like who has what incentive to do what more than anything else. Senator Huff?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned when you were discussing this that how you go, what you used for realignment and the language you use are important. I think that was something along that line that you said. You also said in the Senate Democrat proposal there were some good candidates there. It was very qualified but not very specific. Do you have concerns with any of the things that you've seen there?
The programs on the list largely are ones that we'd recommend that you consider for realignment. We don't have a real detailed plan. I mean, the plan is at a conceptual stage right now. But the notion of juvenile parole is something that we've recommended in the past. Lower level offenders, we've recommended in the past, and many of these other ones as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think I remember exactly where you said the County A, County B example in terms of rewarding good behavior and bad behavior. What example was that? Was that using IHSS, or what is it that...
It was with IHSS, but it was really has to do with caseload programs for social services. The first call on any growth in the sales tax account goes to offset net county cost associated with the realignment.
And so...
to define which sales tax account?
There's a half-cent sales tax that was created for the realignment program. Okay? And those funds are allocated to local, to the realignment program. And any growth in the sales tax is first used to offset an individual county's cost, caseload cost, associated with their social services programs.
So I guess I just want to make the point here that I don't know that it's I'd be sensitive to how we characterize good behavior and bad behavior, because increased caseload could mean more applicants, more labor costs. It's not necessarily a good or bad situation. It actually is addressing the caseload with respect to the demand in an area. Is that correct? And couldn't we design a program that limited, whatever growth was going to be to caseload, and maybe make certain that it's not going to administrative oversight and that sort of thing where it was appropriate?
I didn't use the term good outcome and bad outcome.
Right.
Basically, the concern is if you're raising a county share of cost because you want the county to change its activities and to control the program's cost, if you want to give them a greater incentive to control the program cost, but then you turn around and design a system so that the county doesn't experience any increased cost, then you have not achieved the incentive that you thought you were achieving.
Right. I guess so. Cost containment here. I mean, I think we just have to be sensitive to that. It could be wages and cost of living increases and that sort of thing. And so, some counties would choose to control those costs by not providing for cost of living adjustments and that sort of thing, whereas some might. And that's where you're saying the first call would go to those counties who don't control their costs as well as other counties.
Under the 1991 plan, the increase in sales tax goes to whatever county, for whatever reason, experienced increased caseload cost. Okay, so for whatever reason. As a result, a county that has taken action not to reduce, not to not to have its program costs grow, does not experience directly any fiscal benefit associated with its action.
Got it. Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Nielsen?
Well, in the area of justice, realignment's been happening for a long time, but in ways people might not realize. Not reporting parole-violating behavior, not revoking parolees, not treating parolees, non-revocable parole, which this legislature embraced. Not, or dumping, if you will, into the communities individuals who are yet a danger to themselves and others. Treatment is not available in the community, but they're being put in the community. Low to no supervision of parolees. Early release and early discharge are already in place, and they are, what I would argue, are dumping the state's problem at local government without the means to deal with that. Okay. So I am going to have real concerns about any proceeding in any rapid manner with this, quote, realignment in the criminal justice arena until an awful lot of questions are answered and a lot of knots are tied very tight. Whenever you deal with parole policies or sentencing policies, you better be very, very careful. The consequences are very immediate and direct. Compromise of justice, compromise of public safety. And we've seen too much of that already. And in the short time we've yet got to resolve this budget, and I hope that short time's only a month or so, and not several months.
2 weeks.
Oh, boy, Madam Chair, I'm with you on that. I hope we can make that.
I know, a month would be, yeah.
I'd even bite hard on a few things I don't like to get that kind of an accomplishment.
The date? All right,
yes.
The date is part of the deal.
But I'm very concerned about a number of these things. In fact, I'm concerned about undoing some things we've already done, like non-revocable parole. There are better answers. And were CDCR willing to sit down and negotiate a little bit on some of these things, different answers, or what I would argue are better answers, then I could have a more productive discussion. But I would just argue caution as we move in this criminal justice area with what realignment means. It does not just mean the shift of, quote, responsibility. It means a huge shift of consequences to the people we represent.
All right. Mr. Huff first again, and then Mr. Lowenthal.
Thank you. This is just trying to help me understand something now. So in your handout of options, you have increasing county share, you score general fund savings for the next couple of fiscal years. How do you shift the expense to county or the county share in light of Prop 1A from 2004? Or am I misunderstanding this?
No, you're raising one of the very important questions associated with realignment, in that there are various constitutional, federal, state law, many other kinds of changes. And the only way that to implement a realignment of this kind of magnitude is likely to involve counties being willing to come to the table and to discuss the kinds of transfer. Proposition 1A, just to remind you all, defines as a mandate a change in a program's cost done by the legislature of a required program. So if you had a required program that the state and county are both bearing a share of costs for, and the state takes part of its cost and puts it onto the county, that under Proposition 1A, that is included in the definition of a state reimbursable mandate. So it is something to be very mindful of, and it is something that we definitely want counties at the table in terms of any discussion regarding realignment.
Okay, thank you.
Important caution. Senator Lowenthal?
Yeah, in looking, it's obvious that in doing realignment or restructuring, there are multiple goals. Some of them are competing. Some of it is cost savings. Others are just performance outcomes and better use of resources and potential. The issue I'm interested in gets back to when you warned us that you have to have, pay attention to the fiscal details, whatever you do. You need to have potentially a rainy day reserve, and the issue about measuring outcomes. I want to stay with the third. I think you said on the 1991, we really have never measured any of those outcomes. There were lots of issues around it, but we did. Can you describe what, because it seems to us, to me anyway, that in any of this, if we were doing this, we must measure outcomes if we're shifting this, if we're really concerned about programs. How come we didn't measure the outcomes? Was that just a political decision, or was that difficulty?
We just didn't create a system to develop that data, monitor that data, and to report it. So when we were doing our review of the 1991 realignment, we could find some data, some limited information. Some individual counties had compiled data. But in terms of a statewide accountability system or some kind of statewide measurement, the data were
It just seems critical if we move in this to try to figure out which level of government provides the service at the most appropriate level to provide that service. We need to be able to measure that. And I'm just really surprised that we did not collect it. It was not part of that.
We didn't do a lot of statewide data collection, I don't think, at all in those days. But the one example you used, I think, speaks to it, which is the mental health. Whether the state prison hospital population has gone up or not because we sent more mental health services to the counties and the incentive to not send them to the state. I mean, some of those we probably have some data.
I know we do have some data. We have
Looking
some
around to
data
see where it
on
is.
state mental hospital utilization, and I've seen that in the past. I'd be happy to share that with you.
Yeah, I think some of these we can't always make the correlate. It's like the discussion we had the other week on IHSS and nursing homes. You can look at the nursing home data and say, well, gosh, compared to the population, it really hasn't gone up very much. But can you actually draw the nexus to IHSS? It's a little dicier, but anyway. All right, Ms. Skinner. Sorry.
Thank you. This question to LAO. So when you were describing some of the potential advantages, you used term efficiencies in a couple of cases. And that's a rather generic term. So what were you really referring to? I mean, are you referring to, is it purely a cost efficiency or an efficiency in terms of the a better quality delivery of service? So I'm just trying to understand.
It could be any of those.
But you used it, I mean, you would appear that you had a particular meaning because you used the term as a support of certain realignment.
Certain kinds of program changes where it would make sense to administer it at the county level are programs where there is significant community interest, where you may want to have community innovation. You want to allow opportunities for experimentation and perhaps providing the program within a multi-agency or a multi-discipline approach. These may be programs where you can realize that if you provided this program to a whole family, you could end up having reduced cost and be able to use more resources to provide more services to more people as a result. So the efficiency is using overall public resources to get the outcomes that you desire. And whether or not that means that you put less public resources into the program or whether you help more people, those are policy calls. But the ideal program to administer at the county level are ones where you have active local involvement and engagement and interest in these kinds of programs. But it has to be a program that you're open to having service level variation and different approaches to implementation of a program. If it's a program where that is uncomfortable or that is not desirable for other reasons, then that's not a good candidate for a realigned program.
Well, certainly my attraction to certain of these realignments is because it allows, if we bring it back down to the county level, it allows counties to deal with their specific populations, which we know do vary across the state. This is a very diverse state. It also allows counties to, as you indicated, tap into other programs that they may have or coordinate them in a different way. But the word efficiency, that doesn't necessarily create efficiencies. While it could create a better quality program sometimes, maybe not other times, it doesn't necessarily equate to efficiency.
Well, for example, in terms of the hospital example, prior to realignment, counties did not have significant fiscal incentives to provide outpatient services or to create lower-cost community beds for those patients with mental health problems. So as a result, the state paid a fairly high cost to keep these people in some kind of a state mental health hospital. By giving counties that greater fiscal incentives, they discovered that in some ways it was easier and more efficient to provide outpatient services or to provide some lower cost facility in their community. So I'd say that would be a case where there was some kind of efficiency and better program outcomes.
I almost lost my train of thought. In your chart, where you score quite a significant amount of savings, does that assume the elimination of a number of state departments? It's silent on that. And given that the savings are quite significant, I wondered if it assumes, what are some, not going through the entire chart, but just what are some of the assumptions that underlie the savings that are listed.
I don't believe we have any assumptions for State Department eliminations here.
Our proposal had a few.
Yes, Senate does. But it just seemed like this chart from LAO, the savings are pretty substantial. And
but it doesn't reflect that a lot of this money would have to go to the counties, or that some other money would have to go to the counties to pay for the service.
Right. I mean,
this is just general fund savings.
Okay. So.
Right. If I'm reading. So she's put all the money on the table.
Right, but it can't be assuming that the cost would be the same as if the state administered it.
That's the question.
Yeah, I suppose. It is the question. Thank you. Is this just us shifting, and then somehow we'd still have to come up, or the counties would have to come up with this differential amount? Or?
This simply is a tally of those programs where we think there's some conceptual merit for considering realignment. And this is the cost of those kinds of programs. Now,
so they can't really be scored as savings. It should really reflect that this is just our current cost. This is what
your general fund savings would be if on July 1 these were no longer state responsibilities. Okay.
We kept that same.
Yeah, it is, because so far when we did realignment, when I say we, now I sit in this seat, but in 91 I wasn't sitting in this seat. But when the 91 realignment, the responsibilities were shifted as well as revenue.
That's correct. In the 1991 realignment, we shifted programs, and we shifted a roughly commensurate amount of increased funding to counties for them to carry out that responsibility. That's the 91 realignment. I'm just reminding you that we've done other forms of realignment in the past, and in 97 we did a program shift in the opposite direction that did not involve a tax increase. You can do realignments. They do not necessarily have to be in conjunction with a tax increase.
We didn't bring up anything about a tax increase. The point is you score it as a savings, and if there's still this cost.
Where did she score it? It is a general fund savings if you were to adopt these recommendations, and they could possibly be implemented on July 1st, there would be general fund savings. There would be some increased county cost as well.
And you'd have to send revenue to make it work.
Right. On the child welfare services, if we change the sharing ratio even further, I'm just taking this one as an example, what the logic is for the share going, it's now 60-40, I think?
70-30.
No, 70-30, and here it might be shifted to 60-40. What what kind of thinking was behind the ratios?
Okay. Todd Bland again for the analyst's office. A couple things. Background, back to the 91 realignment. I wasn't here then either, but as I understand it, that was a very conscious decision to raise the county's share of foster care, sort of the placement and maintenance costs for the children in care, up to 60% for the counties, so that they really would focus on what placement it does make the most sense for this child, because there are different types of placement. In general, in child welfare, you strive for kind of the lowest level that meets the child's needs. In other words, placing with a family being better than placing in a more of a group home formal setting.
Right.
So I think that was a very conscious decision there. So I just wanted to bring that up as background. In terms of why is it on this list, and what were we thinking in terms of increasing sharing ratios? As we developed this list, we wanted to basically give the legislature a very broad menu of different things to look at. And any program, in our view, where there is an existing sharing ratio, there's probably room to change that sharing ratio. Child welfare, the reason why we didn't think of an even bigger shift, on the one hand, it is very much a county-intensive program. They really deliver the program. They hire the social workers. They're making the decisions. They're making life and death decisions at the county level about which children to remove and which ones to leave in the home. So we see that as an area of control. So that might have argued for why we thought we could increase their share of cost. On the other hand, we're also in an era of statewide performance measures that the feds measure, and there are limits to how far you can go. So I would say there's room to make changes in child welfare, it can be argued either way.
All right, I have Mr. Leno, Mr. Nielsen, and Mr. Huff.
Clearly, given California's size and population, we are unique, and it's difficult to compare us to other states. But are there any best practices relative to these kinds of considerations that we could look at in other states, maybe larger states, Texas, New York, Illinois, Florida? How these services are delivered, if they are done any more efficiently, if they are done at the local level?
Speaking narrowly back to child welfare, more to the general.
Well, we can start with child welfare, or any of them. Sure.
I know there's variations. You know, we're a county administered state. There are state administration states. I don't really know offhand about sharing ratios and other state-county relationships. Perhaps on the more general.
Small states have more counties. We get into that whole problem. You know, I mean, Iowa
some of the smaller states, they often have state administration.
You know, Iowa has fewer people than Los Angeles, but they have 99 counties or something. I mean, it's sort of, yeah.
Just get back to what we were talking about last week. So many other states have these kinds of responsibilities vested at the state level.
Period.
And it's partly because our counties are just so large in California that we have transferred a very large portion of the health and social services responsibilities to our counties. Average county population elsewhere in the United States is about 100,000 people.
Sure. And I know this may be too broad a question for an answer, but traditionally, if you look at private industry, when a middleman is removed, there is a greater efficiency and an immediate savings. One would imagine with the size of our state operation that when we take out the state as a middleman, there could be savings just in that alone. For most programs, yes, not necessarily.
I think you get some state efficiencies if you devolve to the county level in some cases. Sometimes, though, we're also going to require report backs, and sometimes the state agency still has to be that federal conduit. I think conceptually, right. Senator Leno, you're correct, though. There are some of those savings to be achieved.
And while at the county level you may have an extra middleman, you have an ability to see the whole family or the whole community and organize the various county departments to work with a particular family in crisis. That might be more difficult if the entire program was run by a state level with each one of these services provided through a different state agency.
Good enough. Thanks.
All right. Mr. Nielsen passes. He defers to Mr. Huff.
Yeah, I think just to go back to my previous comment, because I know Assemblywoman Skinner was talking about it a little bit. So the turn of phrase general fund savings on your chart is probably a misnomer, because if you create a mandate, you have to backfill that with general funds. So it may be somewhere, there may be some savings, but the county would also have to agree because of Prop 1A in 2004. We can't just mandate it, right?
This is general fund savings if you could deal with the considerable constitutional issues.
There you go. Okay. I like the way that's phrased.
A menu of potential savings available if you made a change along those lines.
There you go. Okay. Yeah. I'd like to just ask a question. You know, we briefly comment a little bit about the Senate Democrat multi-year government restructuring proposal. Under financing on page 6, they have a number of, what do we call them now, revenue enhancements? Well, it's oil severance tax, VLF, and some other things. My question is, I don't see anything here that has an allocation for Prop 98 or scoring that. Wouldn't we have to be including in a proposal like this some set aside, or perhaps you can speak to the implications, the Prop 98 implications based on revenues?
Under the old VLF, the way it worked is it didn't count against 98 because it was dedicated to the counties. And in 91, that's the way the dedication of VLF revenues to the counties kept it from being in 98.
Michael Cohn with the LAO. The 91 realignment did those revenues, the increased sales tax, and the change to the vehicle license fee depreciation schedule that raised revenues. Those revenues have not been counted as Proposition 98 revenues. There is some legal question on whether they should be. The way the state ultimately avoided the question was by putting what are known as poison pills in the language, basically saying if anybody sues and it's found that these revenues do go to Proposition 98, the whole thing blows up. So the notion is we're going to make the effects so dramatic that in likelihood no one's going to challenge it. There is some policy rationale of not counting them towards 98 if you're talking about a 1991 type realignment where the legislature ultimately does lose control of whatever revenues you're talking about. I think to the extent that there are no longer general fund, general purpose type revenues, then there's that sort of logical argument that they're not Proposition 98 revenues. But again, it's certainly an open legal question, and the 91 solution was that poison pill language.
You're suggesting that perhaps because it's part of a comprehensive package, if it's drafted similar to 91 with the poison pills, that it's sort of the nuclear option if you go after this, even though there are legal implications, that it might pass through the grid of magnifying glasses that are going to be looking over this thing.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary.
And you would attach that as well to the oil severance tax?
I think it's the same argument. It doesn't matter what particular revenue source you're talking about. If it's, again, wrapped up in a comprehensive plan that's very difficult to undo so that the legislature really has lost control of those revenues, you have that argument. If, on the other hand, you were talking about a revenue source, well, one year we dedicate to a realignment, the next year we decide we want to pull it out and dedicate it to parks or Medi-Cal or some other program, and then the next year after that we put it back in realignment. At that point, it's looking very much like a general fund, general purpose tax revenue, and I don't think you would be able to make the argument that they should be excluded from the Proposition 98 calculation.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Skinner?
On the child care suggestion, that's the child care associated with CalWORKs, and my understanding is that much of that is occurring once the family is in the work program and either transitioning off of the CalWORKs grants or completely off. And I was just thinking that realignment that would give it to in effect, back to the welfare departments would keep the family in the welfare system when the whole point of the CalWORKs program is to get them out of that system.
I think there's multiple ways. Again, as we talked about childcare, there are different lines you can draw about where you want to put the control and how you want to do the financing. Currently, the counties do control the stage 1 child care. That's supposed to be until the families are stable as they come through the door.
Right.
Some families stay along in stage 1. Really, there's a lot of county variance there. Some move rather quickly to stage 2 once they're stable. Some don't move to stage 2 until they're off aid.
Right.
And then in stage 2, they're then entitled to 2 years. So I think that would be one of the sort of policy details you would need to work out if you do a child care realignment. Under what circumstances do they then move? As we understand the Senate Democratic proposal, it's stages 1 and 2 and not stage 3, that there still would be some sort of a transition to 3. But again, that's an important detail, and you'd want to get the incentives right.
All right. Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much. Lots of food for thought, I think. I'm sorry Mr. Nielsen's gone, because I was going to talk to him about the corrections part, but that's okay. I mean, because I think corrections is one of the examples where, and maybe other states, this may be one where we could look at some other states. I know New York has some models that have worked rather well in corrections, and Texas has some, and there might be some things we could look at that could, pursuant to the question over here about other states. I know in that one, there are some things. I don't know that so much that they're state local, but they're better ways of doing business. But some of it is, how do you improve public safety at the community level and still put community control on parolees and probationers and possibly then lower your, sort of what's happened with us with the juvenile deal that we did a couple years ago, where you create a disincentive, like you described the mental health one. We create a disincentive an incentive for the counties to keep the youth in the county where the services cost less than to send them to what used to be called YA, where they cost more. The same kind of thing can be done theoretically with adult parolees, where there is a savings to everybody by them being kept and managed and supervised at the county level and not being rolled through the state prison for 3 or 4 months at a time on an annual basis. And somehow, there could be both cost savings to both sides in some ways and possibly an improvement to public safety if you can build the supervision at the local level with the, and the drug treatment or the parolee employment services or any of those at the local level. So, and there is some of these, at least the Senate thinking on some of this was also that there were some departments like aging and drug abuse and such that perhaps, basically are just federal pass-throughs, and you don't need a lot of folks to just do the federal pass-through to do what counties are doing anyway. So why not give them more discretion and then try to get out of the mandate business, just doing the federal pass-throughs as much as possible. We have to report to the feds. There's accountability issues. So that's sort of the drafting thoughts. But anyway, as we move down this path, lots of folks are working on some of these kinds of ideas, I think. All the staffs, we're also kind of all looking at IHSS and some of those. I know the health stuff, the Medi-Cal health stuff is kind of confused at the moment with the federal government going back and forth and giving us different opinions. And so that one's going to take a little work next week, unfortunately. I'd love, Mr. Nielsen and I still would like to get done by July 5th. But if we can, moving things along sooner is better. But these packages are going to take a while. I mean, I think you've just got to be honest about the first coming and all of us wishing we were done by Wednesday. But I see these things all emerging, and I think it's important that we try to do what we can to set us on a multi-year path that makes some sense and get some savings, not just in the immediate, but kind of in the long term, and allows programs to do what they're supposed to do. So I know everybody's working on all of those. We're narrowing the open list every day. We're down to only a few pages of open list. I think the next big one we'll have to take a chunk out is probably some of that education, federal funds and some of those parts of it, not the 98 number, but some of the other ones. So keep at it, everybody. We will remain a call of the chair and see how much more we can get through and move forward as we have done today. That said, we are adjourned for today.